It all started when my family moved into our old house. At first, everything seemed normal, but then I began to notice something no one else in my family seemed to sense. There was an eerie presence, a feeling that I wasn't alone, and it wasn't a comforting one. I had a habit of falling asleep on the couch in the living room, and strange things would happen. Almost every time, I'd wake up with multiple palmetto bugs crawling on me. Our house was spotless, and I had read that these bugs don't usually live inside, yet they only appeared on me, never on anyone else in my family. It was disturbing, like something wanted to make sure I knew it was there. One of the strangest incidents happened one night, though I have no memory of it. My parents told me that I got up from the couch, walked into their room, and just stood there in the doorway, staring at them. They called my name over and over, asking if I was okay, but I didn't respond. My mother said my eyes looked empty, as if I was staring through them, not at them. Then, without a word, I turned and walked back to the living room. My mother followed, concerned, while my father read a prayer from the Bible. But when she reached the living room, she found me fast asleep, as if nothing had happened. I've never been known to sleepwalk before or since, and it unsettled me deeply. After 2 years, we moved to a new house. It was a nice place, but the feeling of being watched never left me. One night, as I lay in bed, my steel bed frame suddenly shook. It was solid and heavy. There was no reason for it to move, yet it did. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night with an overwhelming urge to turn over. I usually sleep facing the wall, but when I turned, I saw it. A pitch-black shadow of a man, standing against the white doors of my closet. My heart pounded as I quickly turned back toward the wall, shutting my eyes tight, forcing myself to sleep. A year into living there, my grandmother passed away. She had always been my rock, my source of comfort. Her death shattered me, and I began sleeping with a lamp on. The feeling of being watched became unbearable, suffocating even. When my mother asked why I suddenly needed the light, I broke down, telling her everything. She tried to reassure me, saying it was probably my grandmother's presence watching over me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't her. Whatever was in my room felt far from comforting, it felt wrong. About 7 months ago, a friend brought over a Ouija board, convinced it would be fun to use it in my room. I was curious. Maybe I'd finally get some answers. We followed all the necessary precautions and started playing. I let her ask the questions, trusting her. We made contact with something, a man with the initials CD. That alone sent chills down my spine, but then she asked, "Do you want destiny?" The planchette slid to yes. I slammed the board shut, forcing the game to end. The entire time we played, I had been hearing a faint knocking from inside my closet. I never touched a Ouija board again after that night. Now, as I approach my 18th birthday, I can't even step into my room. The presence is too strong. Even my friends refuse to enter. At night, when I pass by, I can see the outline of everything in the room except for one corner, the one by my closet. It remains pitch black, darker than the rest of the room. Like a void. It's not just in my house anymore, either. When I'm outside, I still feel watched. Sometimes, I'll be walking with friends, and I'll stop, feeling eyes on me. But when I turn to look, there's nothing there. Just emptiness. Have you ever felt someone staring at you, only to look up and see them quickly glance away? That's what it feels like, except no one is ever there. Ever since I was a child, I was drawn to the mysterious, the unexplained. It wasn't just a passing curiosity, it was an unshakable fascination that grew with me. I devoured books on the paranormal, listened intently to ghost stories my parents told, and hung on to every chilling word shared around campfires. But I never thought, not even once, that I would experience something beyond the veil myself. That belief changed one fateful night when I was 11 years old. Our family lived in an old craftsman-style home in the Brookside neighborhood of Kansas City, Missouri. The house had stood for decades, its wooden floors whispering with every step, its walls thick with the echoes of time. The neighborhood itself was quiet and charming, with tree-lined streets and houses that seemed to carry the weight of many lifetimes. I had always felt safe there, until that night. It was a Saturday evening, the kind of night where nothing out of the ordinary was expected. After dinner, my family gathered in the living room, immersed in an intense game of Monopoly. Laughter and friendly banter filled the air as we tried to out-strategize one another. Eventually, as the night wore on, my younger sister and I were sent off to bed. We shared a room upstairs, and as usual, we lay in our beds talking in hushed voices before sleep took us. The room was dimly lit by the moon, which cast silver beams through the window, painting soft patterns on the walls. The air was still, heavy with the quiet of the night. I was mid-sentence when I noticed it, a shift, a disturbance in the darkness just beyond the foot of my bed. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then, before my very eyes, a mist began to take form. It started as a faint wisp, curling and twisting in the air, almost translucent. But within moments, it solidified into something more, into someone. A head. A face. It hovered, suspended in the dark, its features growing clearer with each passing second. The figure had a narrow nose, a high forehead, and piercing eyes that seemed to lock onto mine. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. Not yet. My curiosity overpowered my fear. I watched as the figure's mouth moved, forming words, though no sound reached my ears. It was speaking to me. Communicating. But what was it saying? I needed confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. Keeping my voice steady, I turned to my sister. "Do you see that?" I asked, barely above a whisper. She opened her eyes, followed my gaze, and then she screamed. The sound shattered the silence, sending a jolt of fear through me. Suddenly, the realization hit me like a crashing wave. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. My scream joined hers, and within seconds footsteps thundered up the stairs. My father and older brother burst into the room, their faces etched with concern. "What's going on?" my father demanded, flipping on the light, and just like that, the apparition vanished. The room was empty. Just two terrified girls and a father who had no patience for ghost stories. We stumbled through an explanation, describing what we had seen in breathless fragments. My father listened carefully, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he left the room and returned moments later with an old photo album I had never seen before. "Look through this," he said, his voice quieter now. "Tell me if you recognize anyone." I hesitated, flipping through the pages, scanning faces of unfamiliar relatives. And then my fingers stopped. My breath caught in my throat. "It's him," I whispered, pointing to the man in the photograph. My father's face paled. "That's my father," he said. "He died in 1950. You never met him." The room grew eerily silent. I had no explanation. None of us did. All I knew was that the face I had seen floating at the foot of my bed, the face that had tried to speak to me, belonged to a man who had been dead for over a decade before I was even born. That night changed everything. It was my initiation into the world beyond, a world I had only read about in books and whispered about in the dark. From that moment on, I would never doubt the existence of spirits again, and that was only the beginning. Over the years, I encountered more unexplained phenomena. Shadows that moved when no one was there. Whispers in the dead of night. The sensation of being watched, even when I was alone. Some spirits seemed benign, others less so. But none were ever as clear, as undeniable, as that first encounter with my grandfather. Perhaps he had come to watch over me. Perhaps he had tried to tell me something important. Or maybe, just maybe, he was simply reminding me that even in death, family never truly leaves us. To this day, I still wonder what he was trying to say. It was a normal night, or at least I thought it was. February 25th, 2024. Just another evening spent in my room, wrapped in the soft glow of my laptop screen. I was working on a heartbreak story, ironically, when something completely unexpected happened. My phone was in my hand, buzzing occasionally with messages from friends, but my attention was mostly on my writing. My room was dark, no lights, just a pale illumination from my screen. Everything was quiet, just the faint hum of my laptop filling the silence. At around 6 p.m., I looked up from my screen for no reason at all. It was one of those strange, instinctive moments where you just feel like something is off. And that's when I saw it. A shadow. Black. Featureless. Just standing at the foot of my bed. My breath hitched. The figure wasn't just a dark mass blending into the unlit room. No, it had eyes. White, glowing, and locked directly onto me. My body froze as if an invisible weight pressed me down. My first thought was that I was seeing things, that my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dim light. But those glowing eyes, they were real. They weren't flickering like reflections, they were steady, unblinking. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my phone. With shaky hands, I turned on the flashlight and aimed it toward the figure. The second the light hit the spot where it stood, nothing. Just empty air. I sat up straighter, scanning my room. My bed was against the window, so I considered that maybe a car's headlights had caused the illusion. But no cars were passing by. No lights from houses outside. No streetlights shining through my window. I took a deep breath, shaking my head at myself. Maybe I was just too deep into my horror writing, letting my imagination run wild. So I went back to what I was doing, determined to ignore the lingering unease in my gut. Then, at 6:30 p.m., it happened again. This time, the shadow was closer. Much closer. It was right beside my laptop, near my feet at the edge of my bed. The same black mass. The same glowing white eyes staring at me. It felt more solid now, more present. I could make out a vague shape, a tall figure, but no facial features aside from those terrible eyes. My blood ran cold. My instincts screamed at me to move, to run, to do something, but all I could do was grab my phone again and flick on the flashlight. Gone. I sat there, heart hammering against my ribs, my skin prickling with fear. This wasn't my imagination. I knew I had seen something. Twice. And I wasn't the only one. Later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I left my room light on, something I hadn't done in years, and started looking up stories online, trying to find anything similar to what I had just experienced. What I found was terrifying. There were multiple reports of people seeing the same figure, a pitch-black shadow with glowing white eyes. And the worst part? Almost every story described the figure appearing in bedrooms, watching people as they lay in bed, too paralyzed with fear to move. One girl shared how she had seen two of them standing in her doorway before they vanished. Another described waking up out of breath, only to see the shadow figure standing at the foot of her bed. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, it had moved closer. Then, there was a story about a girl who saw the shadow crouched in the corner of her room. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, it just stared. She tried to ignore it, thinking she was hallucinating. But as soon as she turned her back to it, she felt breathing on her neck. When she whipped around, it was suddenly standing right behind her. Reading these accounts sent chills down my spine. They weren't just similar, they were almost identical to what I had experienced. The same shadow. The same glowing eyes. The same paralyzing terror. I don't know what I saw that night, and honestly, I don't think I want to. But one thing is certain, I wasn't alone in that room. And if others have seen it too, then maybe it's still out there, watching, waiting for someone else to notice it in the dark.